Hello everyone, my name is Satish Chandra Hari Mangalara and I am a current PhD student in Chemical Engineering Department at Texas Tech University. In this presentation, I am going to talk about my research findings on mechanical spectral hole burning in glassy polymers. Firstly, let's understand the background and introduction. The macroscopic relaxation in glass polymers can be broadly classified into two types. One being homogeneous relaxation, where all the microscopic units relax in the same way as does the macroscopic system. And the second being heterogeneous relaxation, where all microscopic entities relax with specific intrinsic response and their sum yields an average reflected by the macroscopic system. In case of homogeneous relaxation, there is no distribution of relaxation times, but distribution of relaxation times is seen in case of heterogeneous dynamics. Yet, the overall macroscopic response, which is traditionally described by stretched exponential or kWw function, can be a result of either of the above discussed two scenarios. A pictorial representation is shown describing the homogeneous and heterogeneous relaxation. The idea of microscopic heterogeneity in macroscopic glass forming systems can be traced at least to the ideas of Adam and Gibbs in 1965. They attributed the dynamic slowing down that occur when material approaches their glass transition to the increasing length scale of cooperatively rearranging regions. Suitable experimental techniques such as magnetic resonance and floater bleaching have been explored, allowing the issue of homogeneous and heterogeneous relaxation to be addressed more directly. As a common feature, these methods share the potential of providing spectral selectivity. This means that using these techniques, it is possible to select slow subensembles, if they exist, out of the spectrum of contributions that constitute a relaxation process. If such a relaxation is possible, the relaxation phenomena under study obviously is heterogeneous in character. To further study the nature of primary response of glass forming materials, Schreiner and co-workers developed non-resonant spectral hole burning technique to investigate the dynamic heterogeneities in glass forming materials near glass transition temperature based on spectral selectivity. The idea of NSHB is to devise an experimental technique that allows the distinction of heterogeneously and homogeneously broadened spectra. Spectroscopic means to monitor local subsets of the relaxing species in the supercooled liquid state. Heterogeneous dynamics, as recognized in NSHB methodology, is attributed to the presence of holes, which will be explained in further presentation. NSHB has been applied on several polar molecules including propylene, carbonate, and glycerol. But polymers, on the other hand, exhibit weak dielectric response and hence NSHB is not readily applicable in this scenario. To address this issue, Shi and McKenna in 2005 developed mechanical spectral hole burning, which is analogous to NSHB in spectral selectivity and distinguishing heterogeneous dynamics for materials with weak dielectric response. To determine heterogeneous dynamics, selective ensembles in NSHB are modified by application of a large electric field, which is referred to as pump, and in case of MSHB, ensembles are modified using large sinusoidal shear deformations. We will now understand the MSHB methodology and the occurrence of holes. In MSHB, a time-dependent response of a small amplitude deformation called as probe is measured after the application of a large sinusoidal pump deformation. A set of 3 experiments is performed to investigate the presence of holes, which characterize the heterogeneous response. In the first experiment, the material is subjected to a large sinusoidal deformation, which is followed by a small positive step probe. The resulting modulus can be expressed as shown in equation 1. In the second experiment, the pump is followed by a negative probe deformation and the resulting expression is expressed in equation 2. A phase cycling procedure is applied to remove the nonlinear after effects due to sinusoidal pump and the modified response is given by equation 3. Finally, this modified response is compared with a simple linear response from the third experiment. The difference between these two responses can lead to the formation of holes. In the plot, vertical differences, that is G linear minus G modified at a constant time defines the vertical modification, whereas horizontal differences, that is, log T linear minus log T modified at a constant modulus, results in horizontal modification. If the response was homogeneous, then all domains would be modified uniformly, yielding a constant value for vertical and horizontal difference, and the difference would eventually converge to zero at long time scales. In case of heterogeneous response, a maxima in vertical or horizontal modification is seen, which is referred to as holes. These holes reflect the underlying heterogeneous dynamics. Interpretation of holes is not consistent for NSHB and MSHB methods. In case of non-resonant spectral hole burning, the experiments were performed in the vicinity of glass transition temperature and interprets the presence of holes as dynamic heterogeneity related to thermal energy absorbed in selected regions due to pump application, resulting in local heating and changes in local temperature or its distribution. On the other hand, mechanical spectral hole burning has been applied in polymer melts and solutions, where holes were observed and were interpreted due to dynamic heterogeneity, which is related to the type of dynamic regime like Rouse, rubbery, rubbery to terminal or terminal regime, rather than to specific length scale or specific spatial heterogeneity. These prior works in MSHB have concluded that the nature and presence of holes are related to the type of dynamics rather than to dynamic heterogeneity, as related to glass transition event as in case of non-resonant spectral hole burning. Now that we have understood the necessary background, we now look into the current work. So the present work focuses on exploring the hole burning phenomena in amorphous deep glassy state. Mechanical spectral hole burning has been applied to amorphous PMMA and polycarbonate to investigate the nonlinear dynamics close to beta transition with the aim to test the hypothesis that the hole burning event in deep glassy state is related to the dynamic heterogeneity as reflected in the occurrence of strong beta transition. PMMA and polycarbonate are well suited to test the hypothesis since PMMA exhibits strong beta relaxation at room temperature whereas polycarbonate show very weak beta relaxation. The instrument used to carry out mechanical spectral hole burning experiments is rheometrics mechanical spectrometer, also referred to as RMS7200, as shown in the image. The instrument can perform torsional experiments while measuring torque and normal force responses of the material. To prepare samples, PMMA and polycarbonate rods were obtained and machined into cylindrical specimens with a gauge length of 30 mm and a diameter of either 4.5 or 6 mm as shown in the image. Strain in the cylindrical sample is a linear function of radius and is given by the equation r theta by L as shown. Theta is rotation in radians and psi is the angle of twist per unit length. In order to conduct the mechanical spectral hole burning experiments, it is important to determine the linear regime for the materials being used. This would help in deciding the linear probe strain to be used to carry out the MSHB tests. Stress relaxation experiments have been performed at different strain values for both PMMA and polycarbonate to determine the linear regime, and the corresponding shear modulus response is shown in the figures for PMMA and polycarbonate. A strain value of 0.6% have been used in the further study, for which both PMMA and polycarbonate show linear behavior. To correct for the finite strain rate ramp, a correction of T minus T1 by 2 was used to obtain the true relaxation time as reflected in the x-axis of both the plots. The value of T1 was 0.14 seconds to reach a strain of 0.6% on the instrument. Now we look at the results from the mechanical spectral hole burning test. MSHB experiments on PMMA and polycarbonate both show evidence of hole burning at room temperature of 22 degrees Celsius. These vertical hole plots for PMMA and polycarbonate clearly show the presence of holes which are characterized by the occurrence of maxima in vertical modification. The peak intensity of holes increased with increase in pump amplitude, but polycarbonate showed relatively weak intense holes compared to PMMA. These results provide evidence to support the hypothesis that the hole burning event in deep glassy state is related to the occurrence of strong beta relaxation as evidenced by the high intense vertical holes in PMMA. At 2% pump amplitude, PMMA did not show clear vertical modification. as in this case the applied nonlinear deformation was not enough to modify and observe holes within the instrument limitations. It is worth noting that the magnitude of vertical hole intensity for polycarbonate is only around 95 megapascals at 9% pump and 0.0098 Hz frequency, which is the lowest frequency, compared to that of 275 megapascals in PMMA at same conditions. Vertical hole intensity variation with square of strain amplitude at different frequencies are shown in figure for both PMMA and polycarbonate. PMMA shows a quadratic dependence of hole intensities on strain amplitude for three frequency levels. This behavior is consistent with other reported works on non-resonant spectral hole burning and mechanical spectral hole burning in the literature. However, for 0.0098 Hz frequency, a deviation from quadratic behavior is observed for vertical hole intensity in PMMA, and this could be due to shear softening. Another point of interest is that in LOS test, large amplitude oscillatory shear test, normalized third harmonic also varies as square of pump amplitude. However, the origins of third harmonic and burnt holes are different. The presence of third harmonic can be predicted by nonlinear constitutive models such as KBKZ. However, MSHB works from Dr. McKenna labs have shown that KBKZ do not predict hole burning behavior. On the other hand, for polycarbonate, no such quadratic dependence of vertical hole intensity on strain amplitude was observed for any of the frequency levels. The reasons for this deviation of polycarbonate from other hole burning results is unknown. Horizontal hole intensities increased with decrease in pump frequency and the position of the holes shifted to longer times, which is clearly observed for polycarbonate. Peak intensity dependence on pump frequency is related to the relaxation time or the molecular mobility. Molecules whose relaxation time is the same as the time period of the pump can only be modified in a hole burning event. In Glassy regime, molecules usually exhibit large relaxation times, and therefore lower pump frequencies can modify a greater number of molecules. Hence, higher peak intensities is observed at lower frequencies. In case of PMMA, similar behavior is seen at lower pump amplitude of 4% strain and 6% strain, but are not shown here. For 9% pump amplitude in PMMA, incomplete horizontal holes were observed as the relaxation spectra shifted to timescales which are greater than experimental times. This frequency-dependent hole positions have been related to the existence of broad distribution of relaxation times. Now let's understand how these dynamic heterogeneities that causes the hole burning are interpreted. As discussed before, earlier works on non-resonant spectral hole burning have attributed dynamic heterogeneity to change in local temperature that results from localized heating caused by the pump and was related to dynamics of glass transition itself. One such kind of work from Dr. Richard reported a change in effective temperature of 0.6 Kelvin for d sorbitol and at its beta relaxation temperature would explain the hole burning event. In this work, we estimate the local temperature change caused by application of sinusoidal pump deformation by calculating the area enclosed in Lissajous loops. For a 9% pump amplitude and 0.0728 Hz frequency, a local temperature change of 38 millikelvins and 96 millikelvins were obtained for polycarbonate and PMMA respectively. These local temperature changes are not sufficient to change local dynamics and burn holes as observed in case of NSHB experiments. Therefore, dynamic heterogeneity that causes holes is a result of the dynamic regime being probed rather than a local effective temperature change. The conclusions and the future work are presented. The authors recommend to read the published article which covers a detailed analysis of hole burning in PMMA. And finally, the authors gratefully acknowledge the National Science Foundation and the John R. Bradford Endowment at Texas Tech University for their partial support for this project.